If you ever wonder how a simple drink could change the course of history and you're fascinated by the idea that the beverages we consume might have shaped our world, then today's book just might be for you. Today I'll be reviewing A History of the World in Six Glasses by Tom Standage. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at a book that I heard about, I believe from the Freakonomics podcast. They had the author of it on just a few weeks ago. Just to give you an idea, A History of the World in Six Glasses takes a pretty unique approach to world history by examining the impact of the six beverages that he chooses to look at. Now, I do think there's an argument to be made that you could maybe choose different six beverages, but there's certainly something that he's trying to trace in each of these. And the main ones that he looks at is, of course, beer, wine, spirits, coffee, tea, and then finally Coca-Cola, although there is a little bit of an epilogue that talks about the importance of water and how significant that is going forward. Of course, those six beverages have had quite the impact on human civilization, and so Standage shows how these drinks were not just refreshments, but also pivotal in shaping economies, as well as cultures, and of course, even the political landscape. Just to give you a brief synopsis of each of those drinks and why he considers it incredibly important, let's start with the beer. He argues that beer might have been one of the earliest reasons humans transitioned from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled agricultural community, especially explores its role in ancient Sumer and Egypt as a staple of the diet and a religious offering. Additionally, he highlights how central beer was to other early civilizations. After taking a look at beer and how important it was possibly in the rise of civilizations, generally speaking, he takes a look at wine, which is a slightly more developed step. And he says that it actually becomes a symbol of sophistication in both ancient Greece and Rome, and that the cultural and social rituals surrounding wine mirrored the philosophical and political developments of the era. And so it wasn't just about drinking, it was about how and with whom you drank. After that, he takes a look at spirits, and especially with the age of exploration when rum and whiskey and other spirits played a huge role in the triangular trade system. That would include the transatlantic slave system, as well as raw materials coming to Europe, and then manufactured goods going out from Europe. So if you're familiar with that, the famous triangular trade system, spirits were incredibly important. One of the things that was being produced, particularly in the Caribbean, was rum, and it had a major part in the trading that went on. That, of course, means you can't tell that part of that story without addressing the very dark part of the history of trade, particularly with enslavement, as well as just other really awful human treatment that came along with a very brutal trading system. After that, he takes a look at coffee and the rise of coffee houses in Europe, which coincided with the Age of Enlightenment. And so these penny universities, as they were known, actually became the hubs of intellectual exchange, which revolutionized commerce and politics in a way that actual universities weren't always known for doing, especially at this time and place. And so the popular opportunities to share and distribute information, coupled with a stimulant drink, is one of the things that makes coffee an incredibly important part of the storyline that he's telling. Don't forget, of course, the other major stimulant at the time from tea, which fueled specifically the British Empire, both economically and culturally. As an American, we are all familiar with a dramatic moment of break with the Boston Tea Party, and Standage connects its popularity to the Industrial Revolution in particular, as well as the accompanying imperialism in places like India and China. And finally, he takes a look at Coca-Cola, which brings us into the modern era, and it is an incredible symbol of globalization and American cultural dominance. And so Standage explores its role in not just the rise of American pop culture, but specifically in things like World War II and how it became such an icon of American capitalism. I would say that this book excels at making history engaging and accessible. Standage's ability to weave together these questions of economics and culture and politics through something as universal as beverages is remarkable, especially since not all six of these beverages are equally consumed throughout the world, considering stuff like beer and wine do not have nearly the same consumption in predominantly Muslim countries. And of course, the use of coffee and tea varies widely across the world. So if you look at it contemporarily, you might be a little confused as to how this could have such a dramatic impact on world history. But if you give it this long trajectory that he does, I think that you can certainly see the impact of these drinks. And so I think that this is a great book for history buffs, maybe even for foodies, if you think this is the type of thing that would help history appeal to you, or, just anyone that loves learning about history from a more unconventional lens, such as through beverages. I've also read books that look at it through the history of salt, and there's just all sorts of different ways that you can consider world history, and I think this certainly goes into that category. It does also have some limitations. For example, some of the connections that Standage draws is just a little bit overdrawn, in my opinion, just maybe overly simplified. In some cases, I think he argues that one of these drinks, if it had not been there, then the event would not have happened, and I don't know if that's always the case. It certainly was part of the event, but you can't always argue a counterfactual because you never know when it would have been replaced with something else, or if there had not been something else that would have brought that drink into play. And so that's one of those issues that you're always going to have with this. And I think the great example of that is, of course, when he talks about globalization and, talks about how Coca-Cola doesn't really, capture all of the nuances of anti-globalization movements as well. So I would add that word of caution if you're going to read this book. Just remember that he has a thesis that he's promoting in saying how important these beverages are. And I think he succeeds in pointing out that various beverages are incredibly important to world history. You just have to be careful about saying, arguing what the world would be like without them. And I think that's a common pitfall of books of this nature. But I certainly think that if you're a history buff or someone that likes less conventional means of studying history, this will certainly appeal to you. So who's this book for? Well, like I just said, it is for history buffs. It is for people that like that unconventional approach to history. It is for people that are interested in alcohol and the history of alcohol, or the history of coffee and tea, or I would say modern globalization and the exposure of Coca-Cola. I think all of those are justifiable reasons for someone to be interested in this book, and I would recommend it to them. Who isn't this for? Well, like I said, there are definitely going to be those elements of just trying to draw connections that I think might not be quite as strong as he thinks there are, and you do jump around a bit. So if you are expecting like some big world history, you aren't quite going to get that. To make his point, he is going from one major civilization to another, and there's a lot that happens in between, and any one of these drinks that he covers, you obviously could do entire books and entire series on each of them. I'm sure there are entire histories of the world through beer, or entire histories of the world through wine. So I think you have to keep all that in mind if you are expecting some kind of exhaustive history. If so, this is not going to be for you, but it is certainly a great introduction. I would love to know what you guys think about this book, if you've read it, or if you've read any other book in this same genre of a less traditional approach to history. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.